The game of chess is incredibly beautiful and complex, and in my opinion, it's best when it's shared. This is why I created this new format on YouTube called GameCheck. And with GameCheck, you can submit one of your games for me to analyze them. And for the first episode, a good friend of mine and subscriber to this channel called Simon sent me a game of his from the Böblinger Open, which is a German tournament, from the 17th of April. Simon has the white pieces and he starts off with the move d4. We have d5 and Simon as usual goes for his London system. We have bishop f5, so kind of a symmetrical London. We have c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6 and queen b3. I like this move because it just applies some pressure to the black position. So black defends with b6 and we have e3. Now c6 just further strengthening the center, and we have knight f3. We have bishop d6 offering an exchange of bishops, and Simon goes for bishop g3. And he goes for this usual London line where he trades on his own terms. So we have bishop takes on g3 and h takes g3. And the idea is now that this rook is open, and this is a pretty good thing in London. Now we have knight e4, and this move is not so great because you basically moved a piece twice in the opening, and this is something you would like to avoid because your other pieces, for example this knight, is not in the game and still has to participate. Or for example you can castle, which is probably a better thing to do and a much more safer thing to do. However, in this game your opponent decided to go for this knight e4 idea. Now you took on the center, we have c takes d5, we have c takes d5, and now bishop d3. And bishop d3 is, in my opinion, not the best attempt. For me, more natural would be bishop b5 with the check. So you kind of force the king to move because, for example, if your opponent just blocks, then of course with knight takes e4 as a nice Zwischenzug, and let's say a bishop takes e4, just knight e5 and good luck defending this position as black. So for me, for my taste, bishop b5 was far more natural. However, you went for bishop d3. After this, your opponent went for knight d7. So in response, you played the move g4. We had bishop g6 and now knight h4, attacking that bishop. However, there's a small problem with this move because your opponent could have gone for a sacrifice with knight takes f2. We would have king f2 and bishop takes d3. So this would have been advantageous for black. However, black played a move which I would have never played in my own games and which is so crazy that I'm just smiling instantly when I see it. He played the move king e7. And when I first looked at this, I was really surprised and kind of confused why you would play this. You give up your castling rights and your king is now in the center of the board. Why would you do that? Probably my guess was that your opponent wanted to meet knight takes g6 with taking with the h pawn because now the queen is protecting the rook. However, there's a small problem with that. In moving your king, you make it now also very vulnerable towards checks of the white queen. So here, queen a3 was incredibly strong because now, for example, king e8, then you can still take here and you cannot recapture with the h-pawn because then your rook would hang. So this is one problem. If you don't go back, let's say you play knight d6, then we get knight b5 and good luck defending this position. So just keep that in mind. If your opponent makes a move which seems so utterly insane and so out of this world, there's probably some tactic behind this. So after king e7, you didn't see this queen a3, and I think queen b4 is also working. You played the move knight takes g6, and you kind of justify black's play here. So we get h takes g6, and now the rook is defended. So you went for king e2 now, which is also okay. Probably also a check here would have been better in this position, or just trading off the rooks and winning this pawn at the end. So something like this would be also okay. But you went for a positional idea. You played king e2. You connected the rooks, which is also a good thing to do. Your opponent played knight d to f6, so just defending his knight, and you played g5. And you attack the defender of the knight, so let's say if the knight just moves, then of course you win a pawn at the end of the game. So your opponent is kind of forced in this capture line with knight takes c3, because if not, he loses a pawn. So we have knight takes c3, and now b takes c3. We have knight h7 now. And knight h7 is a really brave move again, because a far more natural move would have been, for example, just to play knight e4. This knight here is much more active, pressures the pawn, and even if you capture it, this is okay for black. However, with playing knight h7, your knight is not trapped, because now you found an extremely helpful move. You played f4. And if we look at this knight, you can see that this piece doesn't have many squares to go to. This square is not possible, this square is not possible, and this square is tactically not possible, because if you go here, then of course you lose your rook. This is not working for black. So this f4 was an incredibly nice find for you. Your opponent played queen e8, and now queen b4 with check. King d8, and now bishop b5, attacking the queen. Your opponent went for queen e7, offering a queen trade, and you accepted it. I think not accepting it is probably better for something like queen b3, because you're in a driver's seat. You have the queen, and your opponent has this weak king, has lost castling rights, and has this horrible knight here on the edge. So, but okay, I understand that you wanted to trade off the queens, because you're positionally still better after the queen trade. So we have queen takes and now king takes. And the next move is not as optimal as it could have been, because if you see such a position in which a piece has no squares to move to, you instantly sort of have to think about tactics which become possible, or ways to apply more pressure to that piece. So in this case, we talked about this horrible knight which cannot move. You can just try to apply more pressure to it with a move like rook h3, doubling up, and then winning either the knight or the rook at the end of the day. So this was possible for a few moves, but I guess you didn't see the idea in this position. Instead, you played bishop d3. Your opponent played king f8. Still, this rook idea is possible, and here you played rook a to b1, going for that semi-open file. Now we have rook c8. Still, this idea is completely in the position. But it's a bit different, because now your pawn is also attacked, and this is why you also defended your pawn with rook b3. Now this idea is no longer in the position, and your opponent goes for king g8. So you went for a4, just advancing your pawn, and your opponent went for knight f8. You traded rooks. We have rook takes, pawn takes h8, and now king d2, defending this pawn with the king, and now your rook is free to move. And now your opponent went for knight d7, just getting the knight back into the game, a5, attacking that structure, rook c7, a waiting move, a6, locking that structure, so advancing the pawn, and if these pawns are gone, then you basically have this nice passed a pawn. And we have knight b8, attacking the pawn, but it's of course sufficiently defended, and we have g4, just getting that lonely pawn into the game, and we have rook c8. So black has basically no play and makes some moves. We have f5, now trying to soften up that whole structure here. We have g takes f5 and g takes f5. Now you lose also your double pawn. Your opponent also loses his double pawn, but I guess it's still more beneficial for you. We have now knight c6, the knight gets into the game, and we have e4. And e4 is a move that I really like, because it kind of sets a trap, and your opponent walks right into it. Your opponent played e takes f5, and now, not taking on f5, you correctly took on d5, now attacking this knight. And the knight has to move, and again, your opponent chose the worst square possible, knight a5. And after rook b5, which is a nice positional move, applying a lot of pressure and defending this pawn, let's just see how many squares this knight has. b3 is not possible. c4 is the only square which is possible, but then you sort of walk into a trade chain, and at the end of the day, your pawn is just a passed pawn, and good luck dealing with that pawn with the king on h8. So yeah, this square is also unavailable, and at the end of the day, this knight is really, really unflexible. So your opponent played the move g6, just locking that pawn, getting some way for the king back into the game, maybe going for f6, and we have c4. And c4 was played in a lot of time pressure. I saw that you had 3 minutes on the sheet, and yeah, it's hard to play a move when you're in time trouble. However, this just loses a pawn. But you and your opponent had a blind spot for it for the next couple of moves, because your opponent played just king g7. We have king e3 and now f6. Now king f4, and now your opponent, this was the last option for your opponent to take this free pawn, but instead he went for rook h8. And I guess if you're in time trouble and you just want to make some natural looking moves, then rook h8 is also a good move. We have g takes f6 with check, king takes f6, and now c5. And c5 is a move that I really like, because if you take, then of course your knight is hanging, and your opponent played the only move that somehow holds this game together with rook h3, attacking that bishop. And now you played an incredible move. And if you want, you can try to find it yourself, and I will give you a couple of seconds. So you played the move bishop takes f5, and this is a great move. And yeah, what can you even do? Here in this position for black, there's only one line which kind of holds the game together, and it's g5 with check. After g5, you would have to play king e4, rook h4, bishop g4, just giving up the bishop entirely, rook takes g4, king f3, rook f4 with check, king e2, and b takes c5. And apparently, Stockfish claims that this position is a draw. So completely insane, and this would have been the only way for white to for black to equalize. Your opponent instead went for b takes c5. However, this completely blunders the game, and if you want, you can try to find the best solution and the solution that Simon found, because there's one obvious move and one beautiful move. I will give you a couple of seconds. So the move that Simon played, and which is also a great move, is rook b6 with check. Double exclamation mark, in my opinion. And we have a takes b6. Now, of course, here was the move that everybody probably saw. You just take the hanging rook on h3. Simon created this passed pawn, this passed a pawn. And yeah, let's see how the game ended. Your opponent played c4, so black has also a passed pawn. We have a7, c3, and a8 with queen. Now your opponent played c2, and you're then more than welcome to find the last move of the game. Again, I will give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who found the move, congratulations, you just found mate in one with queen f8. Beautiful game, beautiful move, beautiful sequence. There's no more to say to this. I mean, great game, and if you want, you can submit your own games to this channel by just posting a PGN file to the comments. You just simply write a short message here. Hey Niels, I have an awesome game. I played it yesterday against a friend, or in a tournament, or online. And then you just post the PGN. If it's an online game, you can also just post the game link. I can also make a separate video on this. You can find it in the corner, in the upper right corner. And just click on it and you will see how to submit games to this channel. Everybody, I want to say thank you for all these subscribers that I've gotten in the last couple of days. Also, one video really took off, and I'm really happy that some of you really enjoy this content. And yeah, just thank you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.